haven't been flocking to South Florida lately. President Trump's immigration rules and tariffs have caused controversy in Canada.
A lot of them will not come because of Trump and what was going on with Canada.
We're seeing a decline in the Canadian traveler to our hotel.
Oh, she's scared.
So we are really
she no longer feels like she's free here.
Something's gone quiet in South Florida. Not the kind of quiet you get after a storm, this one lingers. Hotels that used to hum through winter now wait through empty weeks. Phones that rang every hour sit still. At Dairy Bell in Dania Beach, the owner says it flat out. They just don't want to come. He's talking about Canadians, once Florida's most loyal winter guests, now vanishing by the tens of thousands. In just a few months, local officials say their arrivals through Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International are down 13.5%, erasing nearly $90 million in activity. And yet, from the podium, Florida's leaders insist everything's fine. But if the sky's clear, why are so many businesses bracing for impact? What changed between Montreal and Miami, between the promise of sunshine and the silence that followed? Let's find out. Start with what the numbers actually say. Visit Florida logged 227 million Canadian visitors in the first quarter of 2025, down 3.4% from the same period last year. On paper, that looks like a small dip in a big state that hosted 41.193 million total visitors. But averages hide the pain. In Broward County, Visit Lauderdale tracked Canadian travel down between 10 and 16% since April. At Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, Canadian arrivals plunged 13.5%, wiping out nearly $90 million in local economic activity. One area. Now multiply that loss across every beach town, theme park corridor, and snowbird street that used to rely on long-stay winter guests. Economists warn that even a 10% decline in this segment can mean thousands of jobs and billions in spending gone. And some places aren't speculating anymore, they're already there. Restaurants running half shifts, motels running half full, real estate agents watching the phones go quiet. So no, this isn't a rounding error, it's a pattern. And yet, at the state level, the message sounds strangely calm, as if the missing thousands could be replaced overnight. Because while the data speaks in clear numbers, the podium tells a different story. At the 2025 Florida Governor's Conference on Tourism, Governor Ron DeSantis brushed off the warnings. He told the room, Canadians are still coming in big numbers. I would men it even benetui. He even joked, who in their right mind would stay in Canada during winter when they could be in Florida? Then he pointed to the statewide total, 34.4 million visitors in the second quarter. See? Everything's fine. But the math doesn't match the mood. Those millions include convention travelers, day trippers, and weekend tourists, not the long-stay Canadians who fill condos, pay property taxes, and keep local shops alive through the off-season. When 100,000 of them vanish in a few months, no punchline covers the hole they leave. Earlier this year, Santa went further. He suggested that Canadian and Brazilian visitors should subsidize the state, easing the tax burden on residents, and said bluntly he had no interest in giving Canadians a tax cut. For people who've spent decades treating Florida as a second home, it sounded less like a welcome and more like a warning. Tourism experts call it a textbook case of sentiment drag, when tone turns travelers away faster than any policy can bring them back. And the shift isn't just political anymore. It's becoming personal, and it's starting to show on the ground. This slide isn't driven by one careless comment. It's a perfect storm: politics, economics, and a deeper shift in how Canadians now feel about the United States. Start with the politics. Through 2024 and into 2025, former President Trump repeatedly mocked Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, calling him governor, suggesting Canada should become the 51st state, and re-upping tariff threats on Canadian goods. To millions of Canadians, those weren't just sound bites. They felt like slights, a message received by the same families who've spent winters and fortunes in Florida for decades. Listen to the ground truth. Francois Grenier, who owns Dairy Bell in Dania Beach, says many of his regulars won't come this year because of Trump and what's happening with Canada. He says simply, they just don't want to come. But politics is only the first wave. Insurance costs have exploded after back-to-back hurricane seasons, with some premiums soaring into the tens of thousands and others making properties nearly uninsurable. The Canadian dollar has weakened, stretching every restaurant bill and repair cost. And add climate anxiety, rising seas, hotter summers, more frequent storms, the math of owning a winter home no longer works. What's left isn't just about money. It's about belonging, how a place makes you feel when you arrive. And that feeling, for many Canadians, has changed. The numbers are cold. This is what they feel like. At Richard's Motel in Hollywood, Florida, a woman who spent 25 winters in the same room called to cancel her reservation. Through a translator, she explained it simply. She used to feel free when she came to Florida. Now she's scared. She no longer feels free here. That sentence hits harder than any statistic. Because when freedom turns into fear, vacations turn into calculations, and calculations end in cancellations. From the front desk, the signal spreads outward. Visit Lauderdale's losses show up in for sale signs and empty storefronts. Redfin data confirms it. Canadian buyer interest in Florida real estate has dropped 25% since early 2025. The first quarter, normally peak buying season, saw almost no new activity from Canadian investors. One managing partner in Tampa summed it up. Since January, she hasn't received a single offer from a Canadian buyer. Not one. It shows up in financing. 2 mortgage locks for second homes in the Tampa Street Petersburg Clearwater area, down roughly 25% year over year. That's not just real estate, it's payroll, property tax, and renovation work vanishing at once. This isn't a quirky season, it's a broken channel. And to understand how deep that pullback runs, you have to listen to the people tracking it for a living. If you ask the people whose livelihoods depend on Canadian buyers, they'll tell you this isn't a hiccup, it's a decision. In Naples, Karen O'Brien has spent nearly 2 decades helping Canadians buy Florida properties. This year, her refrain has changed. Many of her clients aren't calling to buy, they're calling to sell. She lists the same reasons over and over: politics, premiums, and the simple math that no longer adds up. They're making different choices now, she says. Zoom out, and the data echoes her warning. Moody's Analytics notes that South Florida's housing market has long depended on Canadian snowbirds owners who keep second homes, pay property taxes, and feed the local service economy. Both sides of that equation, ownership and occupancy, keep communities alive through winter. And now? That reliable group is pulling back. Reliability was what made the system work. It let builders plan starts, counties plan budgets, and small businesses plan payrolls. But when reliability turns into volatility, nothing pencils out. Fewer closings mean fewer permits, fewer tips, fewer reasons to stay open year-round. This isn't just about real estate, it's about rhythm. For decades, Canadians provided Florida's winter beat. And when that beat falters, the silence spreads far beyond the housing market. Pull the camera back from Florida's shoreline, and the same pattern stretches north across the border. The latest numbers from Statistics Canada show a chill spreading through what used to be an effortless flow. In July, total international arrivals to Canada fell 15.6% year over year, the 6th straight monthly decline. But look at the lanes that connect the two countries. Canadians returning home by car from the United States dropped 36.9% compared to last year, while returns by air fell 25.8%. Career Source data shows the same slide a month earlier. Negative 35.2% by car, negative 19.9% by air, and through August, the downturn deepened. Canadian car visits to the U.S. plummeted another 34%. This isn't a Florida story anymore, it's a North American one. In 2024, Canadians made 2 million visits to the United States, spending more than $20 billion and supporting roughly 140,000 U.S. jobs. That pipeline once sustained every winter economy from Fort Lauderdale to Fort Myers. Now, as trips shrink and flights go half empty, the losses echo through hotels, airports, and small businesses that quietly depend on those winter migrations. What disappears at the border kiosk doesn't vanish. It reappears as quieter lobbies, thinner ledgers, and the uneasy realization that the chill is spreading south. And as numbers fall, so does confidence in the story being told about them. On national TV, the headline number sounded explosive. In May, Representative Jared Moskowitz told CNN that Canadian tourism to Florida was down about 80%. Fact-checkers quickly flagged that estimate as exaggerated. Fair enough. But here's what the debate keeps missing. Even a conservative 10 to 20% drop in a segment this valuable isn't a rounding error, it's a rupture. Snowbirds don't come for weekends. They buy homes, hire contractors, and stay long enough to anchor communities. When 1 in 10 of them disappears, the loss hits payrolls, property taxes, and winter routines all at once. Local officials say the pattern on the ground is unmistakable. A Fort Lauderdale tourism representative confirmed this summer that Canadian arrivals have fallen roughly 20% since the rhetoric about Canada turned sour. Restaurants feel it, hotels feel it. Even after a few busy weekends, the off-season gaps keep widening. So yes, argue over 80% if you want. But the difference between down 80 and down 20 doesn't change what you see on Main Street. Emptier condos, quieter cafes, slower tills, the signal is the same. The trend is the same, and the damage is already here. Which is why many Florida businesses aren't waiting for a political thaw. They're pivoting to anyone who will listen. Faced with falling Canadian numbers, some Florida businesses aren't waiting for the trend to reverse. They're trying to build new ones. In Fort Lauderdale, the Atlantic Hotel and Spa watched its Canadian bookings slide so sharply that management joined Visit Lauderdale on a trip to Brazil. The mission: court new travelers, fill empty weeks, and offset what the snowbird market once guaranteed. Amy Faulner from the hotel described it simply: "We went to encourage the Brazilian community to travel here." From Tallahassee, officials echoed the optimism. Visit Florida's CEO, Brian Griffin, pointed to stronger arrivals from Brazil and Europe, arguing that international gains would balance out the Canadian decline. On a spreadsheet, it almost makes sense. In real life, it doesn't. Because Brazilian tourists don't behave like Canadian snowbirds. They don't buy condos, pay property taxes, or stay 4 months at a time. They don't become part of the community that keeps restaurants, clinics, and local stores alive through the winter. They fly in for a week, maybe 2, and then they're gone. You can fill a hotel for 7 nights and still leave a 3-month hole in a town's rhythm. The patterns, the durations, the ripple effects, they're not the same, and nowhere is that gap more visible than at the airport gates. If press releases can blur a picture, airport ledgers can't. At Fort Lauderdale Hollywood International Airport, the steepest drop isn't speculation, it's arithmetic. International passenger traffic is down 21.5% year-to-date through June. Gates that once cycled Canadians in steady waves now cycle gaps. Every missing flight means fewer ride shares, fewer room keys, fewer dinner checks. Tourism math is relentless, and it starts the moment the plane lands. That same math shows up in the small places the spreadsheets don't reach. Richard Clevet, owner of Richard's Motel in Hollywood, has watched a wave of cancellations roll through spring and summer. Lately, he says, there's been a flicker of improvement, about 1 good reservation a day. But even that, he admits, doesn't change the trajectory. It's still going down overall. One booking can't rebuild a season. It only keeps the lights on another night. And when that's the measure of success, 1 room, 1 day, 1 small reprieve, you know the flow that once sustained entire towns has thinned into a trickle. Airports count bodies. Front desks count nights. Both are telling the same story. The volume that carried Florida's winters is draining out of the system. And what drains there doesn't just vanish, it drains tax rolls, payrolls, and community life with it. Tourism doesn't just fill hotel rooms. It funds everything that makes a town work. When Canadians sell their winter homes or stop buying new ones, property tax revenue shrinks. That money pays for the invisible infrastructure of daily life: schools, police departments, fire services, libraries, road maintenance. Lose enough of it, and the cracks start to show. Upstream, the slowdown hits the jobs that depend on snowbird momentum. Construction crews that built condos for the winter season, property managers who handled keys and maintenance calls, real estate offices that lived on closings. When those transactions dry up, paychecks follow. The ripple doesn't stop there. Retail stores trim inventory, restaurants shorten hours. And healthcare providers, especially clinics and pharmacies that once thrived on seasonal residents, find themselves overstaffed in what used to be their busiest months. But the hardest loss to measure isn't financial, it's relational. For decades, small business owners in Florida knew their Canadian regulars by name. They celebrated birthdays, weddings, even grandchildren's graduations with them. When those familiar faces disappear, it isn't just revenue that goes missing, it's belonging. Because when a community built on return visits stops returning, what fades isn't only the profit margin. It's the sense of continuity that made Florida's winters feel alive. They're not just staying home, they're finding new winters, warmer, cheaper, and far more welcoming. Start with Mexico. For Canadians who once spent half the year in Florida, the math is impossible to ignore. All-inclusive resorts, predictable prices, no surprise fees. One bill, one receipt, one warm coast. It's not just about cost, it's about clarity. Across the Caribbean, the tone is equally inviting. Tourism boards there are seizing the moment, telling Canadians what Florida no longer says: you're valued here. From the Dominican Republic to Barbados, long-stay packages have replaced the idea of a snowbird with something simpler: guest of honor. And then there's Europe. Portugal and Spain have quietly built a second home boom of their own, pairing mild winters with walkable cities and stable residency programs. For Canadians, these aren't experiments, they're new traditions. Many who sold Florida properties call their move permanent. They've already built new routines, new coffee shops, new neighbors, new walks at sunset. Momentum has shifted from nostalgia to normalcy. That's what Florida risks misunderstanding. This isn't a pause, it's a pivot. And once loyalty relocates, it rarely circles back on its own. The next winter won't just measure temperature, it'll measure commitment. The next winter isn't just another season, it's a verdict. Florida's 2025-2026 season will reveal whether Canadian snowbirds return or whether the decline hardens into a new normal. Across the state, businesses that once planned months ahead are bracing for uncertainty, ordering less, staffing lighter, waiting to see if the silence breaks. The political chill hasn't thawed. Washington and Ottawa remain at odds, and memories of rhetoric that turned partners into punchlines haven't faded. Unless diplomacy changes tone, many Canadians who found new destinations will stick with them. Meanwhile, the economics haven't improved. Insurance premiums remain punishing, with some second home policies rising into 5 digits. The Canadian dollar still trades weak against the U.S. dollar, making every expense from fuel to food feel heavier. And the climate isn't cooperating. Higher temperatures, costlier storms, more anxiety about what comes next. Layer that over a shift you can't chart on a spreadsheet: emotion. Florida once meant freedom, ease, and belonging. Now, too often, it means friction, politics, paperwork, and premiums. Once a traveler rewrites that story in their head, it's hard to sell the old ending. That's why this winter is the real test. If the snowbirds return, there's hope. If they don't, Florida won't just lose a season. It'll lose a generation of loyalty. Words matter, especially when they come from the podium. When Governor Ron DeSantis tells reporters he wants Canadian and Brazilian tourists to subsidize the state, and then adds that he has no interest in giving Canadians a tax cut, the message doesn't sound like leadership. To the very people who've poured billions into Florida's economy, it sounds like extraction. Tourism is as much about tone as taxes. And when you treat loyal guests like a revenue stream instead of a relationship, they eventually stop showing up. While Florida shrugs, its competitors are whispering something different. California, Illinois, New York, and Massachusetts have rolled out new campaigns in Canadian media, pairing soft diplomacy with simple hospitality. We value your visit. Add Mexico and the Caribbean to that chorus, and the contrast becomes deafening. They're building new habits, while Florida keeps insisting nothing's wrong. Every month of denial gives rivals more time to form new loyalties, new favorite hotels, new neighborhoods, new winter routines that feel like home. Once those routines set, they're hard to undo. You can't market your way out of a habit that's already been replaced. Florida isn't losing a PR battle. It's losing a relationship. And relationships, once broken, rarely heal through silence. If you only read the headline, Florida's tourism story still sounds strong. The state welcomed 75.394 million visitors in the first half of 2025, just 0.1% lower than the year before. To most observers, that looks like stability. To the businesses on the ground, it looks like camouflage. The totals stay flat because domestic travel remains solid, roughly 92% of all visits. But the international segment, especially Canada, is slipping fast. On paper, the volume looks the same. In practice, the mix has changed. And in tourism, who comes matters as much as how many come. Short-stay tourists can fill hotel rooms for a few nights, but they don't buy condos, hire contractors, or spend 4 months supporting local stores. You can replace a snowbird with 3 weekenders and still end the quarter in the red. The danger is that surface stability delays response. Policymakers see the big number and assume resilience. But the foundation's long-duration visitors who anchor the off-season are thinning out quietly. That's the trap of a stable headline. It masks a slow-motion erosion beneath it. And as that erosion deepens, another problem emerges. The next generation isn't stepping in to fill the gap. So who replaces them? For decades, Florida never had to ask that question. The rhythm seemed automatic. Older snowbirds sold their condos, younger Canadians bought them, and the cycle continued. But that cycle is breaking. Many of today's sellers are the retirees who built Florida's winter economy people, now aging out of second home ownership. They're downsizing, cashing out, or staying closer to family. And the buyers who were supposed to take their place aren't showing up. Younger Canadians see travel differently. They prefer shorter trips, multiple destinations, or simply saving the money at home. Few are interested in locking capital into a property abroad, let alone one that demands 5-digit insurance premiums and fluctuating exchange rates. Flexibility has replaced permanence. And when permanence disappears, so does predictability. That's why the market feels thin even when the totals look steady. When one generation exits and the next doesn't enter, the system doesn't bend, it hollows. Occupancy thins. Neighborhood life fades. Volunteer rosters, golf clubs, and local charities lose the familiar faces that made the off-season feel alive. If that replacement cycle doesn't restart soon, the decline won't just continue, it'll accelerate. And what used to be Florida's winter heartbeat will start to sound like an echo. Crises don't always arrive with headlines or hurricanes. Sometimes they drift in quietly, slow enough to deny, fast enough to hurt. That's what's happening now. On paper, Florida's tourism numbers still look solid. From podiums, leaders cite the steady totals and declare success. But on Main Street, business owners and tourism boards whisper a different story. Empty rentals, slower closings, canceled reservations, quieter nights. Both realities exist at once because the macro count can stay flat while the high-value segment underneath disappears. That gap between perception and reality is the most dangerous kind. It delays action. It tempts officials to wait for more proof until proof arrives as crisis. You can already see the divergence in details the statewide number won't show. Half-staffed restaurants, condos without winter tenants, airports trimming capacity, chambers of commerce revising forecasts in silence. Each sign is small. Together, they describe an economy running on momentum rather than renewal. Florida will survive, it always does. But survival isn't the same as stability. And every season spent pretending the foundation is fine brings the state closer to a reckoning it could have prevented. Because if perception sets policy, by the time reality breaks through, it's already too late to fix. The first step is the hardest one. Admit there's a problem. As long as state leaders dismiss the warning signs, they tell Canadians, Florida's most reliable visitors, that their absence doesn't matter. And when you make loyal guests feel replaceable, they act like it. A reset begins with tone. Simple acknowledgement from Florida's leadership that Canadian travelers are valued could help stop the bleeding. Not slogans, respect. Not talking points, listening. Decades of loyalty can't be rebuilt through silence. Then come the policies. The insurance crisis is the loudest alarm bell. For Canadian property owners, premiums that once cost a few thousand now reach into 5 digits, and some homes can't be insured at all. Until that's addressed, uncertainty will keep pushing owners to sell. The next lever is diplomacy. Florida can't control Washington's rhetoric, but it can control its own. Every time officials suggest foreign visitors exist only to subsidize residents, they reinforce the perception that tourists are wallets, not partners. Fixing this will take more than optimism. It will take humility, admitting that the state's tone, policies, and costs have driven away the very people who sustained its winters. The only question left is whether Florida acts now or waits for another empty season to force its hand. Florida didn't lose its Canadian visitors overnight. It happened the way decline usually does, slowly, then all at once. For years, the state could count on a rhythm as predictable as the tides. Winter flights full, restaurants bustling, familiar faces returning to the same condos every December. Now, the pattern has broken. The planes still land, but fewer stay long enough to call it home. The streets still shine, but the hum beneath them has faded. This isn't just a tourism story. It's a story about relationships built over decades, strained by politics and tested by cost. Florida's challenge isn't winning new visitors. It's repairing trust with the ones who built its winters in the first place. So, I want to hear from you. Have you noticed it where you live? Emptier shops, quieter nights, familiar regulars who never came back? If you're Canadian, would you return to Florida next winter? Or have you found somewhere that feels more welcoming? Share your thoughts below. And if you want to understand how this unraveling began, how a few careless words and ignored warnings started a billion-dollar slide, watch the video on your screen now, How Florida Politicians Killed Their Own Economy. Because sometimes, the real story isn't the storm itself. It's what happens when the silence stays.